Alright, I am making a video about how to make robots that are like people. Specifically, how to make robots that, not only in the perception of the common person, because I don't think the perception of the common person is a really accurate measure of whether or not something's true. Do you know what I mean? There's lots of things that people commonly believe that are wrong all the time. So just because a robot or a system appeals to a lot of people and they're like, oh, I really think that's a real conscious thing, doesn't mean that it actually is. But if I was to think about a conscious robot, or a robot that's like a person, from a scientific perspective, I would say that it would be a robot that kind of looks-ish. It doesn't have to look like people. That's not really a requirement. But I think for it really to be something that we identify with, it has to look sort of like a person, has to be able to socialize in our society. Those are like the two main ones. But something doesn't really have to be conscious or to be alive to look like us and socialize. There's a whole other real layer. And this is like where artificial intelligence, and more specifically machine learning, starts to like really come in. Is the idea that we're going to start looking at computers and how they can contain systems that think, feel, are conscious and alive, right? And I think I kind of ordered those in how difficult they are, like in terms of how hard those problems are to solve. And I think in order to understand how to create a system that thinks, a system that feels, a system that's conscious, and a system that's alive, it's useful to sort of understand what those terms are in a human sense. So I just kind of want to run through those points and talk about how close we are to making robots that are like people, like real robots that are really like people. So if we think about people on one side and robots on the other, right? And we start thinking about some of these, like I'm going to forget about the top two, I'm going to forget about like what robots look like and how they socialize. Because socializing, how a robot socializes really its interface, right? And there's lots of, actually we'll comment on that. So I'm going to put, people socialize with their senses, and with their internal concepts, right? Like, they have emotional connections with each other, they can sense each other, I feel close to my family, to my peers, I use the internet, I can socially connect that way, I can use my senses of touch, of sight and sound. If I had no senses, I couldn't socialize at all. There would be no interconnections between other members of our society, and it wouldn't really matter if I was conscious or not at all. But that's, in order to evaluate the consciousness of another being and to really comment on it, that to a certain extent, for any being commonly to be commented on in our society as a conscious thing, we have to be able to interact with it, and kind of on our terms. But robots, we think about socializing, it's also kind of like, you can also talk about its interface. And that's kind of really interesting, because robots, and this is kind of going to be the theme going forward if you think about it, is that robots and like machines, we have our own limited, really shitty interface. You know, we can see like RGB, sort of. Some people can't see all of it. You know, we can hear stuff, but if it gets too loud and our ears break, you know, we can taste things, but then we burn our tongues, or we, you know, and it goes on, right? You can touch stuff. We also have like a general awareness of where our body is. Well, it turns out that robots can be given all the same senses as us, but they also, like, and this kind of leads to, you know, we have this brain, we just like take our face, like I'll just use this, here's a person, and this is essentially what we're doing, we're taking our face in our hands, right? Here's an awesome person, and we just ram our face in front of things, like, here's a computer, oh, I can see the internet, I can see people across the world, oh look, there's a hamburger, awesome, I'm going to put this in there, oh great, now I'm playing the guitar, right? Like we're these really awesome machines that just kind of go around, just like ram our face into things and touch everything, and that's how we do things. We're really good at doing a lot of things, kind of, right? That's kind of our MO. Computers and robots specifically, there's this awesome ability that we have as people to create these tools that like actually can do way more than a person can, way better. So robots actually have a huger, like just a massive breadth. They have more senses. We can make a robot that can see infrared. We can make robots that are heavy, light, that can go way faster, that can touch more, they can have more information if we wanted to give them more information. Practically, we usually define like robots and systems and computers that actually have a very narrow sense, a very narrow set of experiences, because there's just so much data to gather, we don't need most of it. But it's important to understand that robots have an increased ability to interact with the environment. They technically, if we could technically make robots that are almost in every way better than people. Whether or not they'd have the same shape and form is kind of up to us, right? And whether or not we want to socialize with it like we socialize with each other. But that's just that one layer, and how we really connect as a society, and why that's important. But really, after that, and like what robots look like, and we start to actually think about what is this thing, and we start to think, could we make a robot that can think? We can make a robot that fits our mold and that socializes with us in our society, that is capable of doing that. Whether or not its brain is capable of keeping up is another story. Can you make a robot that thinks? What is it for a person to think? This is like, people have been debating this for ages. So the only thing you can do really when it comes to coming up with like solid predictions or solid guidance about like how a robot can approach thinking is to really nail down what it is for a human to think in a very constructivist sort of like these pieces fit together sort of way. And anything that doesn't fit that mold is philosophy, you know. And this is sort of directed philosophy. So there's a whole idea that like your soul thinks. Well, that's kind of like, who cares? Like, that's really great that your soul can think. But how do you, like, if your soul can think and your soul's doing thinking, then how do you explain that, like, when part of your brain just gets hit by an axe, that you just can't think with that part of your brain anymore? How do you explain, like, if you cut your brain in half and then do weird experiments where your one eye sees one shape and someone says draw a square, and just weird things happen where you see a square, but you draw a triangle, and just weird things start to happen with your brain. And if your soul is doing the thinking, it's a disconnected body. Is this all an interface problem? And it just begs, it doesn't seem really relevant. So I'm just going to go ahead right away and say that if people believe in a soul, and then that's the source of our thoughts and the source of everything, that like, we don't really care, it's not really relevant. Like, who cares? It doesn't really change all these really awesome properties of the brain that we can actually look at, which are really, really cool. You have this little box in your head, and even then connections all over your body. So you can even think of your brain as an integrated circuit and has like kind of little mini pieces all around your body that do their own processing in a lot of ways, which is kind of cool. And this like whole system emerges this pattern of thought, and we notice that this pattern of thought is electric. And it's also chemical. And it's also physical. So much so that like sometimes the things that we eat, this is the craziest thing, the things that we eat, well, most notably like alcohol, like, you know, beer. That's supposed to be a beer bottle, it's terrible. You know, you drink beer, that messes you up, it makes you think differently, you do things that are crazy. That's cool. Some people don't react as well. Some people puke immediately, some people die. You can, you know, smoke pot, which is illegal. Don't do that. You can smoke cigarettes. They're legal. They mess you up too. You get so addicted, you kill your family if you want with secondhand smoke. It's awesome. And right down to the fact that if you just eat bread, just like what's considered in our society just a regular food, it's actually an opiate, and it releases from your stomach. Opiates will flood your system, and you'll get you like just tons of euphoria. You know, eat a bag of chips, you feel like high on life. It's awesome. Then you take a nap, you get a fucking weird diabetic coma. It's awesome. It's this weird just giant system we have, and you can plug in different compounds into it, and it changes the way we behave and we think. And then why can we think, right? We have all these neurons inside that have all these interrelationships, right? And this is kind of what's going on under the hood. We know there's interrelationships, and there's not just one kind, so there can be like an electric interrelationship, but then underneath there can be a separate web. We'll just draw squiggly lines for this, and this can be a chemical relationship. And then you can have like physical closeness as a property, right? Where there's like different speed characteristics, and then you can have like multipliers for each, and all these layers, right, are all kind of connected and making decisions together. So you have this like complicated thinking network of like neurons in your head that's helping make decisions for you. And that's actually the message here, is that without that network, you can't think. Without this processing of information, step by step, you can't work your way through thoughts. So it's like, can you do anything? Is there an analog in the robot world to thinking? And the idea is that there's a bunch of them, right? Like, this is one architecture. This is one way to think. So it turns out that robots can kind of already think that way. There's this really cool project you should probably look up called Blue Brain. I'm not going to go into detail because I don't really know all the details. But Blue Brain's really cool because they actually took like all these computers and mashed them together. And Blue Brain's all about the idea is that like, well, what if we could kind of make all these mini software neurons, right? And put them together and then connect this to like a body of a rat, or like the idea of a rat. And like, could this brain actually process information? Could it learn? Could it grow synapses? Could it connect and solve little tasks? And well, like obviously, like that seems clear, but they did it. Like that's one. So they used it like a neural network approach, which is basically it's like a direct analog to the brain. A neural network approach is literally they just take tons and tons of interconnected little nodes that make decisions by themselves, and you just ram them together, and you think like, all right, I'm just going to put inputs on one side and get outputs from the other side. And the idea is that eventually, if you do that enough and on fast enough computers, we don't even have computers as fast as a brain yet, but the idea is if you could do that, that you'd get really smart stuff. And every experiment they've done with these kind of networks has shown to make systems that are very similar to like what a little animal would have, or what the kind of intelligence a little creature would have. And so that actually kind of works. But that's just one approach. There's other approaches, right? And that's the cool thing about like a robot and being able to create a system, is that you can create different approaches. And this whole idea of a system that learns about its environment, this isn't really artificial intelligence in its purest form. Artificial intelligence, as sort of an aside, is this concept. There's a giant area of research. And I think it's actually got really terrible terminology around it, because you have the word artificial, which means not real, and then intelligence. Well, everyone's thinking like fake intelligence. Everyone, if you talk to them about artificial intelligence, the first thing they think is like, oh, you're studying how to make robots act like people. And it's like, it's not just about how making robots act like people. And it's the problem is this root word artificial, which has really just kind of ruined everything. And it should be really, in my opinion, the study of machine intelligence, or algorithmic intelligence. But anyway, that's just a play on words, but it makes a difference in how average people think about what you're doing. Anyway, you have artificial intelligence, which is really this giant world, and there's all these intersecting subfields inside artificial intelligence. And a lot of artificial intelligence is all about data sorting and mimicking and searching. Well, I'll put searching somewhere else. This is just roughly. So say you take a game of chess. This is perfect for chess. And you think, I could play a really good game of chess if I could, at every move, know every move in the world that could be possible from that point forward, and choose the most optimal move. I could probably win. Well, that's how searching works. You create, it's basically like a mini imagination. You imagine all the states that there are to choose from, and just choose the one that makes you win. And you're given really clear goals. And you usually use something you can look it up, there's something called like a min-max algorithm. That's kind of the basic idea in like automated game playing. It's like really, really simple idea, and it's like kind of stupid simple. And that's kind of like this whole idea of searching is kind of really, really fucking boring, right? It's like that's not really the path to smartness. So you have searching here. I should draw these all to intersect as well. And maybe write it out better. But you also have this like data sorting, this idea like where if you catalog data, like incoming data, so that's sorting can be this just general idea that given a bunch of examples of something, you learn from the examples, and this is kind of also like something called supervised learning, which I'll talk about. Well, I won't really get into it, but the idea that you just gather all these examples together, and then since you've seen something before, you say this is like this because I saw it, and that's not really that smart either. And in its purest form, sorting is not really that interesting. But there's this whole area which kind of overlaps with everything else, because these are both techniques, like ways to deal with information. But there's this really awesome subfield of artificial intelligence which technically intersects with everything else. It's just like a specific subset called machine learning, and that's what I actually research in a little bit. Machine learning, the idea is, it is exactly what it sounds like. It's a great term. It's how to make machines learn. And it's literally how if you give a machine a certain experience, and you just keep giving it experiences, or you show it a bunch of experiences, how can you make a system that will adapt based on that? So that's pretty abstract. But it can be something as simple as predicting a number, or it can be saying, these people probably will have cancer. It can be something like the stock price will go up on this date at this time because of this. It can be making a robot understand, because you shown it a million times how to pick something up, that it realizes how to do a specific task. It can be really simple learning, like I said, like cataloging a price, or cataloging the value of something, or judging something, or it can be evaluating a completely unknown environment and trying to understand different features of it. And it can be with a goal or without a goal. You can tell a machine learning algorithm, your goal is to categorize all of these things as visually attractive or ugly. And you can give it a goal, give an algorithm a goal, and it will have to decide that. Or you can say, just look at all this data and tell me, according to like how you look at things, how it sort of splits up. And it turns out that there's kind of two broad approaches to machine learning, and one's called supervised learning, and one's called unsupervised. And all these techniques can all be mixed together. I'm not really getting into it. All these techniques can be mixed together. AI, machine learning, which I think is really where the shit is, where it's at. I love this. It can all be combined, and you can actually make a brain that's so much, like in theory, so much more complex, so much richer than the human mind, and it can be better at the human brain at like every single task. And I think it really is just an order of complexity, because we literally don't have the processing power to simulate the complexity of a brain. But like I think we're based on single cells biologically, and we've grown up from like a single cell organism, which we can completely simulate now pretty accurately. And we can simulate viruses and things as well, really, really easily. And if you actually build up the layers, there's just a point at which we can't simulate that complexity anymore. And if we could arrive at something really amazing. And then you have the last few layers, which are really abstract, so I'll just kind of brush over them. You have your feeling layer. Like, well, could a robot feel? And I'm just going to go ahead and say yes. Because if you think about what makes a human feel, well, it's literally, like, people like to talk about their feelings like they're these special ghosts that they visit in the night, and there's something special. But like, really, in reality, almost every feeling, we can use a machine that's just like measures like electric pulses on your body, and you can tell from these lying. Like, it's really easy with biochemical markers to tell what people are feeling, and it's literally just chemicals. Really? Chemical states in the brain. I'm not going to keep really get into examples in physical, like in electrical states. And I think that this is like really easy to see how like a physical or a chemical state can be the analog to like chemical and physical states in a robot system. There's no reason to think it's any different. So when people talk about you make this awesome robot and it acts exactly like a person and it has its own ways of toggling switches on and off and it emulates the states of feeling so well that it actually has internal emotions that it fakes, and the whole thing is fake and it can never be like a person. I pause and I say like, wait a minute, if it's faking emotions and it has its own registers that are registering comfort and uncomfort in different states or discomfort, and it's registering all these low-level emotions, so you've created feelings. Well, couldn't the robot equally look at us and say, oh my god, you're exactly like me, I have feelings, but you have all these little chemical-based registers and chemical-based and electrical-based systems that register the same feelings as me, but you're not really me. There's the same argument in both ways. There's no way when something's exactly the same, it comes down to a philosophical argument, but on an actual scientific, physical level, they're the same. Like, why would you call them different? They're the same. So I think that you can have the same chemical states and electrical states. But just like above, because we're creating robots, we have more possibilities, and we're putting plus signs on all of them, because in every layer so far we've seen that like the robot can do exactly what we're doing and more, which is important. And then you get to the level of consciousness. And this is really philosophical, and I feel like I could probably talk about just what is consciousness for a really long time and really bore the shit out of everyone. And I won't do that, but consciousness, to really evaluate whether or not something is conscious, I really think, for me personally, boils down to whether or not something thinks and feels. I really believe that if you could emulate the feelings and the thoughts in a system, if you have a system that can think and feel, whether or not it's a gerbil or an ant or whatever, I really believe an ant is conscious. I really believe that. I believe that any system that's really going through the motions of having different states of being, and that has like some measure of emotion, and it has some connection to the world, like some sort of interface. I really believe like the whole thing is like over here you think that these deep layers, these really deep layers where you have your the 6 layers that I put down here, and people really think that you're alive and you're conscious, therefore you think, you feel, and you have social relationships. And I actually think it's the opposite. I really believe with everything I've seen so far in my life, that it's because you have thoughts, because you have feelings, because you can socially relate to other people in the world, that you recognize other beings as being conscious, as being alive. And that if another person doesn't feel or another person doesn't think, that they basically fail to be conscious. And feeling, keep in mind, is more broad than just like having emotions. Feeling is like the sense of touch. If you have no senses, you're not alive. If you can't think, you're not alive. And if you're locked away in your own separate universe, it doesn't really matter to me whether you're alive or not. I'm not going to talk about it. And the point is that like the analog here is that if we actually, in my attitude, complete all of these layers and we've created a conscious robot, right? Because a conscious robot to me is just something that has all these above pieces, and I actually believe, other than the order of complexity, we actually already have the tools to create these pieces. So in my mind, we're already ready to assemble a conscious robot, and we're really close to doing so. And then, if you think about what is alive, well, I think everything that's conscious is alive. And so if you ask me, can we create robots that are alive, that are conscious, they think and they feel? when you ask me that, it's actually like, to me, a ludicrous question. Because when I actually analyze the pieces, I see robots as being robots and machines as being infinitely more capable and better suited to be conscious, to think, and to be free than people ever are. Like, we could create a robot that could be free of the desire to eat, to sleep, to have sex, and could be free to contemplate the questions of the universe. We could create that robot. We could create robots that their only purpose in life is to eat, sleep, and have sex. You can create that robot if you want. Create a robot that all it wants to do is serve. And then you get into really interesting, once you deal with the fact that, okay, we can create this robot, it's going to package all this up and put it over here. You have your little robot, and you can give them, you know, a human body if you want, or you can put them on wheels. Doesn't really matter. The point is that this robot that you've created, when you start to define its tasks and you start to define its purpose, that is an analog to defining a human's purpose before it's born, and defining humans' rights and humans. What would you say if you could just define before a person's born that it should derive a sickening amount of pleasure from taking out other people's garbage, and that you never pay it and you just let it do that, and you're like, oh, the robot loves it. And that is actually where the discussion should be right now, is the ethics and the interest in robots. Not in whether or not robots can be alive. Robots are clearly going to be alive, really. The fact once we get robots to be nearly as complex as people, or more, they will obviously be alive. That's going to be done with. But the interesting subject is when it comes to the rights of such systems that we will create that are that complex. That's where we should be focusing our attention on next. That's new territory. That's something that's actually philosophically interesting to talk about. Because it's obvious, I think it should be obvious to most rational people who don't believe in souls, that robots are literally going to converge on behavior that's just as complex, or if not more, than other people.